Hey everyone, let's talk about this. This is the Boss Katana 100 watt head. This is actually the Mark I version of it. And I've had this amp nearly 10 years. I think this is a pretty damn good amp. And a lot of people have been chiming off about this amp on the internet and in YouTube in particular. And I just wanted to add my 2 cents to this. You probably have heard that this is a pretty good amp. And in a lot of ways it is. I think a lot of people would agree that it's got a very good bang for the buck. This thing used to retail about $500, and it's pretty good for what you get. You've got a very, very solid state practice amp, but it's got 100 watts. You can connect this up to a speaker cabinet or a 4x12, and you can get a pretty decent sound out of this. Being Roland Boss, it's built like an absolute tank. It's reliable. You got a ton of features. This thing can emulate a ton of stomp boxes and other effects, so it negates the need to buy them all separately in hardware. And it's a pretty good solution if you're either practicing, it actually has a tiny little speaker in the front here, or you're gigging. This will give you a half decent performance when you're gigging. And as I said, pretty good bang for the buck. Now, I wanted to add my 2 cents to this. First of all, if you want to hear how this sounds and you've never actually heard one, you can hear how this exact amp sounds through various different speakers on the first and second Johnny Saskatchewan albums that are on this channel. So if you're interested in that, I will post some links in the end screen. Half decent sound, but here's what I would put to you. This thing, although it sounds good, it does not give you a tube sound at all. At all. This thing is great to give you a solid state distortion sound, and that kind of makes sense because Boss has, a history of stomp boxes that are all solid state, and it's emulated them quite well in this device, so you do get a realistic stomp box emulation sound. But although the sound is pretty decent, it does not really sound like a tube amp. And when I say that, I mean a really, really tube-like sound. Now, I know that there are a ton of videos on YouTube that have the Boss Katana going up against various tube amps. And, for example, you can put this thing right beside a JCM 800, and you can get the JCM 800 to make a certain sound, and you can also get that same sound coming out of this with like 99% accuracy. So, great. But what I would argue is that, at least in my experience, and maybe this is a failing of me, but I have not been able to get a half-decent tube-like sound out of this at all, and that's where its limitations are. The brown sound setting doesn't really sound like a brown sound. The lead doesn't sound like a rectifier, and the crunch sound doesn't sound like a JCM 800. And my understanding is that that's what they're supposed to sound like, but they really don't. Doesn't sound bad. It just doesn't sound like tubes. And this is very surprising because I love Roland and I love Boss, 2 amazing companies, track record of tons of high quality products that have really become the industry standard. Now, the previous line of guitar amp products that Roland Boss issued were the GA series. And they were not hits, but I really felt that they should have been because they kicked ass. And I own one of them. I own a GA112 that I've shown off in previous videos. I will also place a link in the end screen to that if you are interested in hearing what that sounds like. Now, the GA series, they had a completely different interface. They didn't have any real emulated effects. But I tell you something, they did one thing that this thing doesn't. And that is, when you set them right, tweaking the settings, they sound like a tube amp. Holy crap. They sound like a pretty damn sweet tube amp too. So when I bought the Boss Katana, automatically, because it was Roland Boss's new product, I was expecting them to have built the same emulation and algorithms into this. Well, they didn't. And I cannot get this thing to sound anything close to a GA112. Highly desirable sound. Say what you want about the interface and the form factor of the GA series, but they could nail the sound. Now, if you want to hear what this thing sounds like I said, this is on the 2 Johnny Saskatchewan albums that are on this channel so far. If you want to hear what a GA112 sounds like, that was the distortion sound used in the Asphalt Death album that was also placed on this channel, the entire album, so you can hear how that sounds like. I will put a link to that in the end screen, and you can decide for yourselves. Now, in the meantime, if somebody knows how to set this thing up, you know, in the tone studio and everything, to make it sound like a dirty, tube-sounding, overdriven, nasty kind of sound you could get out of a JCM 800, that type of sound, which I don't see them emulating on YouTube with an actual JCM 800, let me know, because this thing can't produce that, whereas their previous line of amps could. And I need to do a really good video of the GA112 if anybody cares, showing just how amazing the sounds that amp can produce sound like. This is a good bang for the buck, and it can do a lot of things, but I just feel like it's a real step back in terms of the quality of their distorted sound. So I'm sure I'll get people's opinions that range the spectrum, and, you know, whatever. Hey, each to their own. You can think what you want. But for me, that has been the big drawback of this thing. And, you know, for that reason, I don't wholeheartedly recommend it, unfortunately. Roland, did a lot of work with their full-blown stack form-factored amp. I forget what you call it. It was the Waza Craft. They had a Waza amp. The thing cost about $10,000 or something, or $15,000 for the head. And they put a lot of R&D into that. It did not make its money back, as far as I know. But the presumption was that they put that technology into their GA line of amps and then into the Katanas. At least that's what I'm assuming. But this does not sound like anything that they would have spent that kind of money on to do the R&D in terms of the sound. So I'm interested to see what they're going to come out with next. I know they've got a couple of revisions of this that have come out since, but let me know what your opinion is on this, and if they're even going in that direction. Thanks for watching. You guys are awesome. I'll see you on the next video. Take care.